Welcome to Crossroads. Terror charges against who? Antifa have actually now gone through. It happened, and a group of them have now been collectively, when you all combine it, 450-year sentenced to prison after a violent attack. Also, right here in New York, socialist candidates are sweeping primary election victories. This is as the Democratic Socialists are starting to overtake the Democratic Party. We'll be talking about that. And also on another topic, we're watching fraud rings get dismantled all across the country, and a recent case has 455 people charged in a $6.5 billion healthcare fraud scheme. We're talking billion there, it adds up. I'll be talking about these topics and a whole lot more today, so make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into it. First off, President Donald Trump designated several branches of Antifa as terrorist organizations. Some people said, well, it's not an organization, it's an idea. Well, guess what? Terror charges, have now gone through with 8 members of an Antifa group. And this group has been sentenced to 450 years, if you combine them all, to prison following a violent attack. Let me show you this. Andy No has this. Andy's been one of the top experts following Antifa. He says this: 8 members of a North Texas Antifa terror cell received historic federal sentences on Tuesday, with prison terms ranging from 30 years to life in prison for their roles in the shooting ambush of an Immigration Customs Enforcement detention facility. This is when, of course, they opened fire on an ICE facility. It notes the attack led to the first federal Antifa terrorism prosecution. We actually had it, finally happened, and later convictions in U.S. history, it says. Now, he adds, quote, U.S. District Judge Mark T. Pittman sentenced ringleader Benjamin Hanel Song to 100 years in prison, meaning you're going to go to prison, you're going to die in prison, and you're still going to be sentenced to prison after you die. That's how long he's in prison for. It says Song was convicted of the most serious offenses in the case, including attempted murder and discharging a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence. It notes that prosecutors proved at trial that he shot Alvarado Police Lieutenant Thomas Gross in the neck during the 4th of July attack last year. Shot a police officer in the neck. Now it adds this, quote, the jury, found the defendants guilty of offenses including providing material support to terrorists, which is a big thing, by the way, because remember, the nature of a terrorism charge or of a terrorism designation is not just like, okay, you blow yourself up with like a vest or something and you're a terrorist. No, it includes if you supported a terrorist. They've actually been charged with providing material support to terrorists. Now, why does that matter? A single prosecution laying down a definition spreads, okay? You now have a terrorist designation of an Antifa cell, meaning anybody who gave material support to these terrorists could be charged by extension because they provided material support to terrorists. The case might not end here, in other words. So if you have a terror cell getting money from various NGOs, billionaires, foreign billionaires, your local community organizer supporting a terrorist cell of convicted terrorists, that is also a crime. Now, that means that these groups are going to have to either distance themselves from the Antifa terrorists or risk going to prison themselves for, again, providing material support to terrorists. They were also charged with rioting, conspiracy involving explosives, and also other related crimes. It adds this as well, quote, the trial featured extensive evidence regarding the group's ideology, anti-fascist action, planning, and preparation for the attack. Now, basically, it's interesting they had to bring up the ideology, okay? This is why the ideology matters. What links Antifa? Because when Trump made his designation of, Antifa as a terrorist group, you have to designate certain organizations. So they designated, for example, various branches of Antifa with international ties, which allow them to call it a transnational terrorist organization. What unites these organizations is actually they do have shared ideology, they have shared operations, and they have shared financial support, especially when it comes to like anti-fascist action, which if you haven't seen it yet, I did a whole feature on it on the Josh Philipp show, explaining how the whole network works and the history of it. Anti-fascist action in Germany is kind of like the mothership, you know, so to speak, of Antifa. They're the one that kind of like they're the glue that holds it together. Other branches in the UK, very powerful as well, also within this organization. Various groups give them finances. A lot of it takes place through like tiered structures. And there's a bit of a fungible nature to this, you could say as well. Where, for example, you know, there could be a foreign Chinese billionaire giving money to like a far-left NGO or political group, which happens, right? We know Code Pink gets money. We know that, you know, the Party of Liberation and Socialism gets money. There's others as well that nobody talks about. The Rainbow Coalition is actually one of the biggest, and almost nobody talks about it. The Rainbow Coalition, one of the biggest communist organizations working on using Maoist strategy of uniting minorities to create a majority in order to push a far left agenda. They're very big. What happens is this. These organizations oftentimes, not these ones exactly, but organizations like this, within the same network though, they start up tiered, like lower tiered organizations based on certain issues. So if the news has mass migration is a big issue today, they'll start up, you know, a pro-mass migration like NGO or nonprofit, and then they will start agitating on it. They'll start up the, you know, Free Palestine became a thing. They started up a Free Palestine movement. The anti-ICE thing became a thing. They started up an anti-ICE movement. When Black Lives Matter was a thing, they were starting up different factions of BLM. And so popular movements, which they can subvert and alter the trajectory of. They can overtake an organization or a movement and steer it in their direction. That's what these organizations do. What you'll end up having is this. These organizations get money, right? Because people ask, how are they funded? How does the thing work? Let me explain, okay? These organizations get money. These organizations are not violent, typically, but they have elements within them that are often violent, right? And so they will have employees, they will pay people, they're getting money from foreign billionaires, you know, there's money flowing into it. You have a guy or a girl or something else right, that gets a job with one of these organizations, right? They get a job with these organizations. They get paid through it, it pays their bills, everything else. But in their free time, or maybe they get paid and they don't do anything, they become agitators. And so the organization has an element of plausible, even though they serve the interest of the movement, the organization itself has plausible deniability. Well, look, the guy's crazy, who are we to say what he does in his free time? That kind of thing. Which is why when James O'Keefe with O'Keefe Media Group, formerly Project Veritas, they actually infiltrated the chats of Antifa, and they have tons of far-left organizations. It's almost entirely left-wing, okay? It is partisan. But it's almost entirely far-left organizations, including major ones, where members of these groups are active Antifa members. So they're working through the nexus of NGOs, nonprofits, grassroots organizations on the far left, and in addition to their activities on that, they're involved in radicalism. They're involved in riots. They're involved in violence. They're involved in training. They're involved in legal representation, material support for terrorist organizations in this case. And that's how the organization works. Again, back to my main point with this though. What makes this important is now you actually have terrorism charges and charges of providing material support to a terrorist organization. That means anybody who is giving material support to these networks, and there's a lot of them, risk facing criminal charges as well, because we just saw this happen. And the charges, the sentences, I shouldn't say charges, the sentences, the prison sentences this group of Antifa members just got is crazy. I mean, justified in my opinion, but crazy. Prison, 30 to life. This is a huge thing. A Acoustic Kitty in the chat, and a good seeing you in Florida, by the way. Acoustic Kitty says, so universities could, we had an event, of course, in Florida over the weekend, those of you who were there. So universities could and should be charged with aiding and abetting, etc., for Antifa-connected student groups. They actually could, because I do wonder what the nature is of understanding. You could argue a student group at a university gets some type of material support from the university itself. That could be, for example, funding. I don't think a lot of them get funding from the universities. Some of them do. It could include providing of a place to operate, which many of them do provide, things of that sort, or a form of legitimizing of the operation by having it hosted as a student group. I know there is a process for getting approval for student groups, and so because of the process, that does provide the basis of material support. The other side is, I know Trump has actually been for some universities to push back against students engaged in radicalism, violent threats, that type of thing. This was the big issue, of course, with, and I know it's become a big thing these days. I don't care. I care about human rights. I don't care about the race issues and stuff, okay? But I know that like anti-Israel has become a big thing, and I know at universities, a lot of Jewish students were getting like attacked, threatened. I don't support that at all. I think it's terrible. And Trump was actually calling out the organizations doing it, because what was happening was this. Student groups you had student groups racially targeting people for discrimination or attack at universities. I don't think that's good. I don't care who it is, okay? That's a terrible thing. And the issue Trump was raising is a lot of these student groups doing it were being recognized, allowed to operate, and even somewhat protected by the universities. And so when he was pushing back against those actions, it was framed as, in terms of the current conflicts, Israel-Palestine conflict. Like, I think that's separate. I think this is about racial discrimination, religious discrimination, and so on. But it was framed like that with the media, right? On your point to what Acoustic Kitty said, I think that on the basis of that, you could actually use the same argument to go after the Antifa networks, saying, look, and a lot of them will not call themselves Antifa. They call themselves all kinds of names. But if they're, back to what I was also saying, part of the court argument was the discussion of ideology. Why does that matter? It means that if you have an organization calling it Happy Rainbow Group, or the Smiley Cafe, or the Peaceful Party, or the party that hates violence, but they're engaging in violence, and the ideology that they're studying and is the basis of their operations is Antifa ideology, the fact that that was how they went after these individuals is what ties them to it. So if you have a radical organization, it doesn't matter what they say they are, it doesn't matter what they call themselves, it doesn't matter, what the idea is. If the ideology that they're studying, propagating, and putting into practice is Antifa, then that would be the basis of some of these charges, which is what we just saw. That's why it matters so much. Speaking of the far left, by the way, socialist candidates have now just swept in primary election victories in New York. This is as Democratic Socialists begin to overtake the Democratic Party. I'll be talking more about this, though, after we come back from a quick break. I tend to look at events a little differently than most people. Not just what's happening on the surface, but the deeper patterns shaping the world around us. And in today's world, economics is not just about markets. We've seen how authoritarian systems use economic pressure, control over resources, to create vulnerabilities that can be exploited. That's why I believe in owning something tangible. Physical gold and silver from American Hartford Gold, the company I trust. These are tangible assets, not dependent on political systems or institutional stability. Gold has preserved value through inflation, currency shifts, and periods of global uncertainty. American Hartford Gold has an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau, thousands of 5-star reviews. They can deliver gold and silver directly to your door, or help set up a gold IRA if you're thinking long-term and want to diversify your retirement. And right now, if you mention my name, Joshua, you get up to $20,000 in free silver with your first qualifying purchase. Call 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532 or click the link in the description below. Welcome back. Socialist candidates, and I mean actual public socialists saying it publicly, it's not a secret. Socialist candidates swept in primary election victories in New York. This is happening as the Democratic Socialists are taking over the Democratic Party from within. Now, this is happening across the United States. I'm going to explain kind of how they're doing it, what's actually happening behind the scenes, and kind of like what's really going on. I can tell you some things that a lot of people would not be able to tell you about this. Let me explain, okay? Let me start with the story. Washington Post says this: Democratic Socialist candidates swept key primary races in New York on Tuesday, accelerating the rise within the Democratic Party, while more traditional center-left candidates and moderates backed by corporate interests prevailed in other contests. It notes that results of primaries across 4 states Tuesday cemented the growing influence of New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani's brand of progressive populism, while demonstrating its potential limits outside of large East Coast cities. It notes that New York City voters nominated 3 left-wing U.S. House candidates endorsed by Mamdani, boosting his clout as a political kingmaker, which is interesting, and ousting 2 incumbents in the process. It notes that comparatively moderate Democrats prevailed in other primaries, including in Maryland and Utah. What's happening? Let me explain, okay? The Democratic Party, as we currently know it, is not a single party. I would say the same thing for the Republican Party as well, okay? I'm not trying to be partisan here. The Republican Party, the MAGA Party, is a different party from the Bush Republicans. The Bush Republicans were a different party from the Reagan Republicans, right? These are different factions within the same party. In addition to that, though, you also have very different... Remember, Trump almost ran as a third party in 2016, right? Do you remember that? Because the Republicans almost didn't give him the nomination. He was going to run as a third party. What is happening is this. So, you actually have, of course, completely different political parties. You know, the Libertarian Party is a different political party from the Republicans, although there's some overlap. You know, you have Rand Paul, who's, I think, more, much... He is a libertarian. I don't think he tries to hide that at all. And so you do have some libertarians who kind of run under the Republican ticket. Same thing with Democrats, okay? The Democrats are more than one party. There's several parties, right? The JFK Democrats are kind of like what the MAGA movement is, right? Not even that, actually. They're like very different, right? The JFK Democrats were a very different political party. Go back and look at the actual political parties of Hillary Clinton when she was running, okay? I mean, let me rephrase that. Bill Clinton, right? The Bill Clinton Democrats, what were they? They were against mass crime. They were the 3 strikes laws, right? Meaning 3 felonies, 25 to life. They were the ones going after the quote-unquote super predator criminals, so they were the anti-crime party. On 3 strikes, 3 felonies, you're prison. Imagine if they actually enforced that today. You wouldn't have these career criminals, right? They were the mass anti-migration party because they were pro-union. That was the Bill Clinton Democrats. Okay, that's a totally different Democratic Party from the Obama era Democrats, where they became, in his first term they were very anti-immigration still. Second term they changed it. The reality is, behind the scenes, one of his main advisors on migration said basically, look, you got like 80% of the Hispanic vote. If we let them all in, give them all citizenship, Democrats will never lose another election. They flipped from being the anti-mass migration party to the pro-mass migration party because of that. It was about votes, okay? That's what it was. The Obama-era Democrats were very different from the Bill Clinton-era Democrats. Massively different, okay? Then you had the Biden-era Democrats. Trans movement, whole 9 yards, and that kind of really defined his party. You know, and you could say that started with Obama too. Race politics, gender politics. Biden was kind of Obama part 2, right? That is the new Democrat Party. That party is moderate in comparison to the Democratic Socialists, because you actually have legitimate, full-blown communist, Marxist, they call it socialist because when you apply that to politics, the form it takes is socialism, right? Communism in practice is socialism, because communism, if you achieved it, which is why I said I never achieved it, would be the negation of systems. You actually cannot have true communism existing within an institution. So communism, when practiced through a government institution, is socialism. When practiced through unions, it's syndicalism. When practiced through corporations, it's state capitalism. You know, it's all kinds of things like this, right? There's different names of it. These are actual socialists. So what happened with the Democratic Socialists and the Democratic Party is this. The Democratic Socialists understood that they didn't have the clout. They didn't have the ability to actually win elections. So what did they do? Just like some libertarians, they ran under the ticket of the main political party, because there's some overlap, right? Just like you have Rand Paul running, with the Republicans. I don't know, does he still do that? You have Democratic Socialists running under the ticket of Democrats. This is how you got Bernie Sanders, how you got AOC, it's how you get a handful of them, right? They're Democratic Socialists. Although AOC got booted out, I don't know if she's back in, but she got booted out for a while because she refused to align with them on the anti-Israel stuff as much as they wanted. Basically, here's what happened though. Democratic Socialists for a long time had kind of an agreement with the Democratic Party. They effectively ran the get out the vote drives, they ran the grassroots operations, they ran the community organizers, they ran a lot of the NGOs and nonprofits. In other words, the grassroots of the Democrat Party became Democratic Socialists of America and their offshoots. Party of Liberation and Socialism, Freedom Road Socialists, Code Pink, the Rainbow Coalition, which I mentioned, the Obama-era Democrats, a lot of them are Rainbow Coalition. That's actually the organization that unites most of that brand of the Obama-type Democrats. It's a Rainbow Coalition. They represent the grassroots of the Democratic Party. They are ideologically very different from the conventional Democrats, though, because you still have the older school, I'm not saying old school, but the older school Democrats. And this is the reason why Nancy Pelosi did not get along with the socialists. She was actually against them. They had a lot of conflicts. This is why, for example, you have a lot of the kind of Bill Clinton era Democrats and even the earlier ones, because some have been around for a long time, being very much against the socialists. They do not get along within the party. What had happened, though, was this. Democratic Socialists said, look, we're the ones who do the get out the vote drives. We're the ones who do the voter registrations. We're the ones who do all the protests, who do all the grassroots agitation. We're the ones who run all the community organizers. We're the ones who control the entire base that figures out what the issues are, what people care about, and how we frame the entire thing. Why are we working with you? The Democrat establishment is the money. The Democrat establishment, although you could argue that the grassroots element has become the money too, because there's a lot of billionaire funding in it. There's a conflict within them, and basically we're at a point now where Democratic Socialists of America is saying, why are we not running our own candidates? Why are we not using the issues we know voters care about and using that to win elections? And why are we not the party? It's like AOC said when she first got in, I'm not in here with you, you're in here with me. She's quoting, of course, that movie, The Watchmen, right? That's what's happening. So the Democratic Socialists are at a point now where they're saying, look, we control the party. We control the voters element of it. Why are we playing second string? This is our party now. So they're kind of launching an overtaking, or maybe a coup. Maybe that's too strong a word, but they're overtaking the Democrat Party, and they're doing this as well during a very vulnerable time for the Democrat Party. Because how many of you in the chat can tell me what are the policies of the Democrat Party right now? Tell me in the chat. What are the policies? What are their policies? What is the narrative of the Democratic Party right now? What are they promising voters? Right? What is it? I can tell some things, well, they want to push back against migration, they push back against deportations. They want to stop wars, I guess. Like, they're not really strong arguments. If you want to break it down, the entire narrative they have right now is being against Donald Trump. You cannot have a political platform based purely on opposition to the incumbent leadership. Because when you do that, what you oppose is what you create. Okay? Like what you resist is what you create. This is an issue that we know throughout history, okay? There, in some ways, like the media, for example, constantly criticizing Trump has the effect of constantly keeping him in public discussion. That has the effect of causing constant public debate. And the constant public debate has people negotiating amongst themselves, well, is this good or bad? The opposition itself creates exposure, and the exposure itself sparks public debate, and the public debate itself looks at the issues oftentimes, unless someone's so politically agitated they don't want to do that, right? Everybody engaged in that is actually looking at things and making decisions, and so that is actually having the effect of propping up Trump. Funny enough, right? That is the platform of the Democrat Party right now. That has become their identity. It's merely the party of opposition. Democratic Socialists, they're kind of the same way, but they're actually playing it very smart. What they're doing is they're using Trump's platform. They're actually using Trump's strategy. What is that? They're not talking about, trans movement for kids. They're not talking about, they're talking about a bit, like just being against Donald Trump. Yeah, they're talking about that some. They're more talking about affordability. They're talking about finances. They're talking about the economy. They're saying, I'm getting free buses and community grocery stores, and we're going to lower the rents, and we're going to tax the billionaires, and so on like that. Everybody gets a free pony, and I'm gonna make everybody. I'm gonna give everybody, a free pony and like a sparkly backpack, like a school election or something like that. They might not ever do it, but that's what they're saying, right? That kind of stuff. They're promising relief, in other words. Now, the difference you have with narratives is this. Oftentimes, the radicalism is not in the narrative. The radicalism is in the solution to the problem you're identifying. So Trump is saying there's an affordability crisis. Americans are suffering. The Democrat Socialists are saying there's an affordability crisis. Americans are suffering. The difference is in the proposed solution. Trump is saying affordability crisis, Americans are suffering. It's because we're being robbed through bad trade deals. We offshored all of our factories. People don't have jobs. We brought in mass migration, which is causing greater competition for a finite resource of housing, of, again, cost of goods, of jobs and everything else. And if you lower that, then there'll be a higher supply, lower demand, meaning prices go down. That's Trump's argument. He's saying bring back the factories, renegotiate the trade deals. If people are ripping us off, balance out those issues, whether it be medication or trade or whatever, right? Balance that out, bring the factories home, the Americans, people will have more money. The Democratic Socialists are also saying the same argument. You're suffering, finances suck, so on. Their solution is mass migration. They're saying end foreign wars. They're more talking about American disengagement. No longer have America being engaged on the global stage is like the Pax Americana. They want to have that pulled back. And they also want to have more severe solutions. So rather than, for example, relieving high rent through deportation, which is what Trump is doing, and through forbidding, or they're moving it through, Trump is going to sign it, but making it so investment firms have a harder time buying up properties, which again is supply and demand. You buy it all up, you create a monopoly, it causes problems. Democrat Socialists are saying subsidized housing, cheap housing. We're going to pay for it using other people's money. Their solution is tax the billionaires. Their solution is, raise taxes, create a bigger welfare state, support the people who can't get by, mass migration, so on, but tax the big corporations, give things away for free, and that's their solution. In my opinion, that does not work in practice. Why do I say that? It's never worked, okay? It only works so long as you have somebody to take money from. But when you disincentivize the people who make the money, who you take it from, eventually there's no money to go around. We see it over and over again. That's why socialism doesn't work. But people are not thinking that far ahead, right? They're thinking on surface arguments. This guy says, I'm suffering and he's going to help me make more money. This guy says, I'm suffering financially and he's going to give me financial relief. Yeah, it may not be good for that guy, but I'm not that guy. I'm the guy who's struggling. And so that's the narrative they're using, and most people do not think beyond that. That's why it's working. In other words, the democratic socialists, even though I don't agree with socialism, I don't think it works, right? And I think it's harmful to people. I think you cannot uplift one person artificially without tearing down another. It just doesn't work, right? If you want to balance things out like this, you can't do it without persecuting another person. So you can't have these policies without harming certain people, and which is why I think it doesn't work. It doesn't incentivize these people to do better or relieving them from persecution, which I believe bad trade deals, mass taxes, subsidized policies, and so on, which causes imbalance. So I think that's the cause of this. That's my opinion, right? In other words, what I'm saying is this. The Democrat Socialists are pulling a very interesting move right now. They have a platform, a very strong platform, even though I disagree with the proposals of it. They have a very strong platform based on Trump's method. They're using Trump's strategy. They're not talking about the radical stuff. They're doing it still, but they're not talking about it. And they're also basically taking advantage of the fact that the Democratic Party offshored or delegated most of their voter drive policies to that party, which is now saying, why are we giving it to you? This is ours. It's a very smart move. And based on that, you're going to see them probably win a lot more midterm elections, okay? Now, the other side of it, which is very important, okay? There are many moderate Democrats who, they march in lockstep. They tend to vote with each other, even whether they're socialists or the Bush era, or, their Clinton era, right? Or Obama era. They still tend to vote with each other. But the big criticism that many Democrats have of the Democrat socialists, even if they agree with them on policy, even if they agree with them in principle, is this. They do not believe that these issues are going to be popular enough to win elections. Not on a large scale. They can win in California, they can win in New York City. They can win in areas that tend to vote very far left, but they do not believe they're going to win in swing states. They do not believe they're going to win in more moderate areas, and they do not believe that the normal, moderate Democrat is going to vote for them. And so they believe that the Democratic Socialists should run under the Democratic ticket, not that the Democrats should run under the Democratic Socialist ticket, which is the way it's flipping right now. In other words, have the policies, but don't say it publicly. They're now saying it publicly. And a lot of them do not believe that the average voter is going to go for that kind of stuff. That is one of the big criticisms. So they might win some of these local elections, they might win some of these, but come September, when we have the actual midterms, we're going to actually see whether this is a working policy. That is why this matters. In the chat, Ashley from California is saying, I fear the socialists will do well this midterm season because a lot of voters are struggling financially and will be easily swayed by the promise of free things and relief. In my opinion, that's going to work with certain subsets. But I think the Democrats are going to lose several factions. I think they're going to lose a lot of the moderates. Why do I say this? I know a lot of people who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump. During Trump's first term, and this is kind of the other side of it, I know a lot of people who are Bernie Sanders supporters who voted for Trump. Because remember, Bernie kind of got shafted, right? They're like, yeah, you won the primaries, but it's our party and we're not going to let you do that. I don't think you did, mate. I won the primary. I don't think you did, mate. There's that kind of thing, right? The other wild card, though, is this. Okay, so a lot of Jew, because this has become focused a lot on the Israel-Palestine issue. That's one of their big talking points right now, especially in New York. A lot of the Jewish voters, I do not believe, are going to vote for the Socialists. It's mixed, because I know that a lot did vote for Mamdani, even though he's kind of like, the Socialists are very much against they're against Israel on the side of this debate. The wild card you're going to have, though, is the new kind of alt-right type Republicans, and I don't know what other word to use for them right now, because there's not really a name for them. But you have a new faction within the Republican Party that is opposed to Donald Trump, but is on the Israel side more in support of, they're against Israel, right? And so that could become one of the main issues that could push people to the other side too. So you might have some voters drop ship and run from the Democratic Party, but you also have a new rising faction within the Republicans that might vote for a Mamdani. Right now you have a lot of major talking heads. I'm not going to name names. I don't like attacking people directly on this stuff. Let's just say you have a lot of talking heads within the alternative conservative space who are now against Donald Trump and pushing for like a third-party candidate of some kind. And the type of person I think these people would vote for would be like a Mamdani. So that is the wild card right now. And I think that what the Democratic Socialists are counting on is using a Maoist-type strategy of uniting the minorities to create a majority. Probably get enough, if they could get the Democratic vote, if they can get new voters, they can get maybe something else, maybe some mail-in ballots, if you get my hint, wink, wink. And then get, of course, the fleeing Republican voters who are breaking away right now because of this whole big narrative. They might be able to form a large enough majority to actually win elections. And I think that is the wild card with all of this. We'll have to see how it plays out. Look, another big issue taking place right now, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is talking about, the Trump has been saying Cuba is next. Cuba might actually be next, okay? He's saying, look, first it's Venezuela. Hope you enjoyed your leader. By the way, horrible earthquake happened just, I think, last night. Death toll not currently known. Some people are saying possibly around 10,000. We don't actually know yet, but really my heart goes out to the people in Venezuela. So this is horrible. Back to that point, though, leadership change in Venezuela, leadership change in Iran. And Trump is saying, look, say regime change and you want a regime change, we killed like 2 waves of their leadership. That's a regime change. Does that mean they're changing in policy? I don't know. We'll have to see what the peace deal means. After Iran is going to be Cuba. Cuba is next. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio is also now putting this in action. Here's what he's saying on X. He said the situation in Cuba is devolving as the island's corrupt, brutal, and anti-American communist regime continues to prioritize its own total control over the freedom, opportunity, and basic well-being of the Cuban people. He notes the Cuban military-controlled conglomerate, GAESA, has persistently served as the main vector for regime elites to steal the island's few resources, diverting them for repression, anti-American subversion, and spying, instead of schools, power plants, and basic necessities for the Cuban people. He adds, today I designated additional GAESA network entities associated with moving both its money and its physical assets, as well as entities responsible for exploiting Cuba's mineral and metal reserves for ill-gotten profit. He said any person providing services to these sanctioned actors is at risk of being sanctioned themselves. He said foreign banks and other companies that provide services to these entities should freeze those activities immediately. What does this mean? It means Cuba just got debanked. The Cuban leadership just got debanked. Now, the big socialist narrative of Cuba is, well, Cuba would work financially if America didn't sanction them. In other words, if Cuba, the communist Cuban regime, were capitalist and could engage in capitalism, then communism would work. Because communism would work if it wasn't communism. Right? You hear it? You get this? But the other narrative is this, right? This is the truth of it. Cuba gets an insane amount of money. The quality of life for the average Cuban should be higher. America provides a lot of money to the Cuban people. That money is then stolen by the Cuban elite, who then embezzle it all. They have a lot of money, okay? Like an insane amount of money. These organizations run the tourist hubs, they run a lot of the resources, they do exports. That's all sanctioned now. The leadership, the military, the intelligence, sanctioned. Which means if they continue to engage in this, they ain't getting their money. And the bigger side of it is Marco Rubio is going after the banks who handle that money. And that's not even just going to be U.S. banks. That could even be foreign banks. So if China, right, China is one of the major supporters of Cuba. Chinese banks, one of the big factors that is involved in a lot of crime and other things like that. If they continue engaging with it, they risk being sanctioned as well. And you might say, well, what does China care about that? A lot. Because Chinese banks do business in the United States, Chinese banks do business in Canada, Chinese banks do business in the Western world. If they get sanctioned for doing this, it's game over. Like, they're not going to want to do that. Let's just put it the way. The juice ain't worth the squeeze. The benefit of engaging with Cuba is not high enough to justify that type of activity for them. Meaning Cuba just got debanked. The Cuban leadership just got debanked. Now you could argue, well, the Cuban leadership might say, hey, hombre, hey, gringo, why do I care? They're going to care a lot. Why do they care? Because they just saw Maduro get a one-way trip to New York. You know what I mean? They just saw the Iranian leadership, get blowed up, right? That's what happened. And then Trump is saying, you're next. You know what I mean? You're next. And guess what? You guys are closer to us than those countries are. Like, we can do it without leaving our couches. You guys are close enough. So the message Trump is sending to the Cuban leadership is pretty strong right now. That might actually force them to reduce their totalitarian policies. And if they do that, guess what else is happening? The Cuban people are fed. I know Nick Shirley actually did some investigations there. I mean, kudos to him because he was followed by Cuban regime spies. Every person he talked to on the streets is like, yeah, law was horrible. He would support America taking it over. Like, yeah, please liberate us from socialism. You know what I mean? Free the people. That's what the average Cuban has been saying. And if you remember a few years back, you actually had a mass protest take place in Cuba where people were talking about light and life as opposed to like the regime of death, which is the part of the slogan of the Cuban regime. They were talking about life and light. And there was a big popular song that was spreading, and everybody was dancing to it and saying, "We're going to overthrow the Cuban regime, the communist regime. We're going to be like the Paris of the West yet again," which they used to be. That was the movement. Those people are still there, and they want the Cuban communist regime to end so that Cuba could again become a popular, wonderful, prosperous country. You also, and not a lot of people are talking about this, and I've been thinking about it quite a bit, Latin America is changing probably faster than the United States. The anti-communist movement sweeping through Latin America is big right now. Colombia just elected a Bukele-like figure who's saying, we're going to go after the cartels, we're going to get rid of socialism, and we're going to bring back the Colombia of what we used to be. And I know these days in America we're like, yeah, like third world countries. They used to not be that way. Venezuela, even in like the 70s, was very wealthy country, very prosperous country. Cuba, prior to Fidel Castro, was a wonderful, prosperous country. Many countries in Latin America used to be extremely prosperous. These were wonderful countries. And the argument they're having, the political campaign they had in Colombia just recently was this. They were saying that never went away. We were never conquered. We were never overthrown. The elements that are who we are have not been destroyed. It has been suppressed by bad policy and socialists. And they're saying we can still be that. Crime, gangs, cartels, corrupt politicians, that is what has undermined the prosperity of Latin America and the popular pushback we're now seeing in elections across the region. And not everyone's talking about it. You have Venezuela, you have El Salvador, you have Honduras. They actually elected a young guy, is very good. Colombia, Argentina. We'll see what happens with Brazil, because Lula kind of got brought out of prison to run and overturn Bolsonaro. Latin America could change. And if that happens, you also have the restoration of the Monroe Doctrine, what Trump is now calling the Donroe Doctrine, of economic engagement within the Americas. That could push out China, Iran, and Russia, which all three have very strong influence in Latin America. That will, by extension, push out the socialists, get rid of the cartels. You will get rid of the financial networks that prop up the socialist parties, and nobody wants to talk about this, but it's true. The socialist parties are funded by drug money and corruption. If you get rid of the politicized corruption that controls Latin America, because if you control a country through corruption, whoever controls the corruption controls the country. Get rid of that, and Latin America will become prosperous again. That's happening right now. And that's beneficial for the United States. It's beneficial for them. That will disincentivize mass migration. Maybe a lot of Americans want to go there because life there is pretty dang nice. I know this because I lived in Costa Rica part of the year growing up. You know, not as a Costa Rican, it was a vacation home. You have some beautiful countries there. It's changing. And as it changes, you're going to watch a lot of stuff shift. One last point back to Cuba. Why does Cuba matter? Cuba is not some little do-nothing communist country. Cuba is not some little, banana republic, like country with not much clout that is just kind of the focus of international conflict. Cuba matters because of its intelligence services. And this is a narrative throughout Latin America. Cuban intelligence services have infiltrated the militaries of other countries. This includes Venezuela. This includes Brazil, which is a big political argument there, by the way. They have propped up the drug trade. The long story short of it, go back to the time of Mao Zedong. Mao, when he created the drug wars against the United States, he did it working through Cuba. Went to Cuba, Cuban intelligence networks worked to create the drug cartels. The drug cartels are working within that nexus. It's a political movement disguised as a criminal movement. They worked with China, worked with Cuba, and Cuban intelligence runs that. If you get rid of the Cuban communist regime, the intelligence networks that have infiltrated governments, political movements, and cartels throughout Latin America will disintegrate. It will go away. And that will have the extension of causing political change throughout Latin America and a reduction in crime. That's why this matters. Nobody talks about this stuff, but this is why this matters. Huge issue. Cuba is the linchpin to undo the destruction of Latin America. And if Cuba is next, that will change the entire region, including probably North America. This will make everything different. It's really big. Another topic. So we're talking about rents in the United States and the cost of living. I mentioned that Trump is basically saying the same thing a lot of the socialists are saying. We're going to lower your cost of living. The difference is in the solution. And one of the things happening right now is that the Trump administration is doing a victory lap. They're saying policies we have on, against mass migration is having the effect of lowering rents. Let me show you this first, and then I'm going to do a victory lap also because I told you so. I know all you agree, but just in general, okay? The White House press poll is saying this. President Donald J. Trump's decisive enforcement of America's immigration laws is producing real results for hardworking families, including the nation's 46 million renters. It says rents are falling sharply across the country for the first time in years, as the record surge in illegal immigration has been reversed. It adds that rents in major metro areas have dropped significantly from their Biden-era peaks. It says in many cities, these declines mean hundreds of dollars back into family budgets every month, relief that was impossible under policies that flooded communities with millions of new arrivals. In other words, it's what I was telling you. In Canada and in other countries, this is a normal, non-controversial part of the debate on mass migration. Supply and demand. If you have 10 houses and 100 people competing for 10 houses, those landlords or investment firms or banks that control those houses can charge you whatever the heck they want. And you're going to live, 3 roommates to a house to afford that house because they can charge you, because there's more demand than supply, okay? If you flood New York City with 10,000 people a week like they were doing, and people are already stuffed into small apartments, and there's already not enough housing to go around, and you bring in 10,000 people a week in a place that under its law requires you to provide housing, what's going to happen? Rent is going to go through the roof. If you bring 10 million people into a country and put them into highly densely populated areas, not the countrysides where a lot of people don't want to live, you put them in the populated areas because they have access to all the services and resources and everything else that give them all the free stuff, you're going to create higher competition for a finite, limited resource. In Canada, this is the cause of high rent. Mass migration, foreign buying of homes, and policies that restrict the construction of new homes. Competition, high demand, low supply. Obviously, prices go up. I've been saying that this will happen in the United States with deportations, that rent will go down. Rent will go down. And you're now seeing this. Let me show you. The White House press pool says, the driver is clear. President Trump's border policies are working. Net international migration collapsed more than 50% nationally in 2025, which is not a lot, in my opinion, given how much he had under Biden, but still. It says the sharpest drop on record, easing the crushing pressure on housing created by Biden's open border disaster. It says with far fewer new arrivals competing for housing, as I said, vacancy rates have risen and landlords are now forced to compete on price. You heard it here first. You heard it here first. I should note this is actually bad for homeowners though, but it's good for renters, okay? I know there's two sides to every coin. It's bad for homeowners, it's good for renters. It adds this though, President Trump promised to secure the border, enforce the law, and put American families first, and the data proves he is keeping that promise. It says lower rents, less strain on schools and hospitals because every kid has to be put up in public school, and hospitals have to give care. They can't deny care if you go to the emergency room, and a lot of illegals just take advantage of that. And it says, and more breathing room in communities across the country are the direct result of ending the previous administration's open border disaster. And it adds this, quote, when America controls its borders and enforces its laws, American workers and families win on housing, wages, and quality of life. They're doing a victory lap, okay? They're doing a victory lap. And I'm going to now because I said it first. I think you heard it here first. I was saying rent is going to go down as the issue of supply and demand is eased. There's other factors to it. The other big factor, another big one, is the limit on new construction. And part of that is to blame on COVID. COVID actually damaged the ability of people to build new homes. Developers, construction workers, they were on lockdown. They were not essential, I guess you could say, which is a stupid narrative, but that's what it was. And so the construction of new homes was limited at a time when they were bringing in, 10 million people, right? That created a huge problem on supply and demand. When people were foreclosing, when people couldn't afford their homes anymore, when people were offered a lot of money, they were selling the homes, they were having to file for bankruptcy, they were losing their homes. The banks were buying the homes or investment firms were buying the homes. On that front, Trump, you have an issue now of this, rental economy where everybody rents everything. Everything is a live service. You own nothing and you're going to be happy, right? Maybe not so happy, but you're not going to own anything. You're not going to own your home because it's a rental. You're not going to own your car because it's a rental. You're not going to own your movies or your video games or your any digital products because you're not even buying them. You're buying a license to rent them. It's all rentals. You're not going to own access to any of your online services or online software because they're all rentals. They're all an annual subscription. You're not going to own anything because everything is a rental or a subscription service with live service. That's the way the world was heading. Trump came out and said, America will not be a country of renters. We want to have homeowners and so on the home front. And he now has actually an executive order, and he's calling on Congress to make it law, a policy to limit the ability of banks and large investment firms to buy single-family homes. Congress is now passing that. That actually did go through. Any day now, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, Trump is expected to sign that bill. The caveat to that is that a few teeth were taken out, okay, in the process of Congress passing it. And so it's not as strong as it was initially, but it will have an effect. And that will also discourage banks and private equity firms and investment firms and some of the big ones from buying single-family homes and treating the homes as investment properties rather than a place to live. Why does that matter? If you're treating a home as an investment, you want the value of that investment to increase. Meaning, how do you do that? You push policies to limit the creation of new supply, meaning do not build new homes, change zoning laws to discourage the creation of new single-family homes, which they're doing, and also increase demand where you encourage mass migration. So you can artificially raise the value of your assets by lobbying for no new construction, more red tape, zoning laws to prevent new construction, and also mass migration to create demand for the product you have, thereby driving up the investment, right? Driving up the value of the investment. By doing this, they're discouraging that process, and that's a very big deal, actually. It's a very big deal. I will go over the final bill once it's signed. I will be covering it on this show because I think it's a very big topic that is not nearly appreciated enough. If you want to watch some of my deeper analysis, though, I also have a video about why rent is so high on the Josh Philipp show. So watch my video explaining the whole thing if you want to really dig into it. In the chat, imagine that as saying nothing goes down without cause and effect. Also the thing that's forgotten, right? Every action has a reaction. Everything causes something. I believe you're referring to my manufactured equity analysis, right? The difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome is the difference between freedom and socialism. Equality of opportunity means all of us are playing a game, and there's rules for the game. We're all playing with the rules. Without a doubt, some people take advantage of those rules. Without a doubt, some people are better at doing it. The question is, but generally speaking, the way the rules are set up in the United States is if you work hard, you generally can succeed. There are some exceptions to this, and I believe the exceptions to this are not created by capitalism or the values of a normal free society. I believe the problems we have that are even recognized by the socialists are ironically caused by state interventionist socialist policies, meaning the problems are not caused by capitalism. They're caused by crony capitalism. They're caused by cronyism. They're caused by state interventionism and false, state subsidies, which are interventionist policies as well. That is what's causing the problems. And I could go across the board. We could have a whole discussion on this. In every area where people argue they are suffering, there is some form of state interventionist socialist policy, which you could say that there's lighter forms of socialism, right? The interventionist state policies, that is the cause of it. While the socialists are arguing, saying that, hey, we can't afford rent and life sucks because you can't have a home, you could argue it's caused by the policies advocating, right? It's caused by the policies that they're not resolving. They're not fixing the problem. It's caused by the issue of supply and demand. If you want to fix that, build more homes or limit mass migration or prevent monopolies from forming by stopping investment firms from treating these things as properties and then squeezing the market by limiting supply and increasing demand. Interventionist policies altering the nature of a free economy. Even what the corporations are doing represents that, by the way. And I'm just as much against corporate monopolies as I am against, mass government totalitarianism. I think either is bad, actually. As would the original anti-communist, going back to G.K. Chesterton, by the way. It's a narrative we've forgotten, unfortunately, that monopoly and totalitarianism through any force, engaging in interventionist policy, is the same problem that socialism represents, basically, right? That's my analysis. That being, again, the problem we have with normal capitalism, or the, let's say, the equality of opportunity. The equality of opportunity is being constrained by interventionism. The other narrative is equity. And you cannot achieve equity, meaning everybody has an equal outcome regardless of the effort you put in. Meaning we're all playing a game, and no matter if you win, no matter if you lose, no matter if you sit back and drink your coffee, no matter what, you're going to get the same result as everybody else, right? There's no incentive to push yourself. There's no incentive to work. And if you don't, you're going to get the same outcome as the guy who worked 25 hours, the last 2 days. Like that's the narrative of it. Funny enough, and you might think this is funny. In other words, as was said in the chat, cause and effect. You can't, every action has a reaction, right? That is the activity. You're going to disincentivize people from working hard, and it's not going to work in the end. Funny enough, I've been reading a book some of you might laugh at me about, but actually, I never imagined I would find something so deep in a book like this. I'm reading Starship Troopers, okay? Laugh as you will. It's actually a pretty good book. I read it because it actually has some pretty interesting political analysis, and I wanted to read what it was. Starship Troopers, of all things, I'm surprised as well, has one of the best takes on why socialism doesn't work. It is one of the best takes on the flaw in Marxism, and it's actually framed as such in the book. It says that Karl Marx's theory on labor is fundamentally wrong because he assumes that all labor is the same. He assumes all labor is the same. So the baker working 8 hours here should be paid the same as the baker working 8 hours here. But what is misunderstood is this. Not all labor is the same. This is why you have master craftsmen and why you have amateurs. It's why you have master musicians and you have amateurs who get paid differently. It's why you have all-star baseball players who get paid a lot and the guy who never won a game who does not get paid a lot. There's differences in terms of what you do with your skills, how much you push yourself, how much you apply yourself. There's a difference. The analysis they use is restaurants. A chef, two chefs, given the same ingredients, will create different products. And a master, Michelin-starred chef is going to create a different, higher quality product using the same ingredients than a, backdoor, working out of like a shopping chef you gave ingredients to. There is a difference in terms of the quality that we create, the skill we have, the individual effort that's put into it. That is what defines the output of labor, not the hours counted, not the labor itself, but what you put into it. That is the difference. And that is the fundamental flaw in Marxism. And it's also why, what you have too with Marxism is you disincentivize people from doing well, right? Why would you want, if in New York they make it so that, I'm going to get the same amount of money not working as I do working, 12 hours a day, why bother? You know, in the Soviet Union, they had a saying, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. Eventually, you reach a stage where you don't even care anymore. This is why communism, what happens? What happens in China? What is the Made in China brand? What does it tell you? If you read a thing that says Made in China, it says no quality. Why is that? Because people don't care. They don't care about craftsmanship. They don't care about skill. They don't care about effort, because you get paid the same at the end of the day, and who cares? The fundamental flaw in Marxism, and there's a lot of them, but one of the most fundamental flaws in Marxism is the theory on labor, because what goes into it and the product created is different. That is what it is. Look, on another topic, we're watching fraud rings, speaking of lack of labor, fraud rings get dismantled. And in a recent case, 455 people have been charged in a $6.5 billion healthcare fraud scheme. Massive amounts of money. We're seeing this like case after case. On this front, you know, J.D. Vance, vice president, he's leading the anti-fraud movement right now, the coalition on it. And they're actually finding enough fraud where it seems that a huge chunk of our taxpayer dollars was literally being stolen by fraud. Let me show you Epoch Times. It says the Justice Department announced on June 23rd that it has charged 455 defendants for various healthcare fraud schemes totaling more than $6.5 billion. Yet another fraud scheme. It says the charges unveiled at a press conference in Washington are against defendants for a variety of schemes in what officials called a record-setting action against fraud. It also said FBI Director Kash Patel said the charges arose from a, quote, new era of investigating fraud. This is a big deal because we've been told, my generation, when I get old, maybe I'm already kind of old, I don't know, I don't think I'm that old. When I get older, there's not going to be any social security left for me or my generation. I don't think it's that bad yet, but that's what they've been saying, right? We know that healthcare in the United States is insane. We pay more money for healthcare than most socialist countries. Do you know that? Talking about socialized healthcare in America, we already pay through our taxes and through other things like Medicaid and Medicare more money per person on healthcare than your most far left insane socialist countries on earth. And the product we get sucks. We get horrible, worthless, I mean, I should say worthless, there is some value to it. We get very poor quality for what we pay, okay? I would argue that America's hospitals are pretty dang good, but the drugs we get, the mass prescriptions, like just the way it's handled sometimes, the amount they charge you for it, it's horrible. You're going to get charged like $50 for a dang lollipop, okay? Like, it's insane. They gouge you. They price gouge you. Part of that is because of our lawsuit culture. You know, doctors have to have crazy insurance to operate here. Part of it is because of the way that the negotiations and the price setting goes. This is not talked about often. The price setting goes on the back end of establishing prices. Part of it relates to fraud. And I think the issue of fraud can actually change. Going after the fraud, while Trump also goes after the other issues, which he is going after, it will actually change it quite a bit. Now that I've opened this can of worms and explained a few things, the elements I just described being the factors causing high cost of healthcare in the United States are all simultaneously being resolved. One of the issues was international price setting through the pharmaceutical industries and the price negotiating elements, right? Basically, Americans were picking up the tab for the rest of the world. I explained this in an article, in a full video I did on the Josh Philipp show recently, if you want to watch it. I did a whole episode on it. Americans are picking up the tab to subsidize low cost of medications for Canada, Western Europe, and actually most of the world. And Trump is resolving that by making it so Americans get most favored nation status, meaning of the Western countries, meaning whatever the lowest price paid for medications is within Western Europe or Canada is the price they have to give to Americans. Meaning Europe and Canada are going to have to start pulling their own weight when it comes to that. Meaning the cost of medications is going to go up a lot in Europe and Canada and go down in the United States. We're still picking up the tab for the entire developing world and third world. That's not changing, okay? We're still doing it for them. That's going to change. That's going to lower the cost of drugs. Trump has also created Trump RX to sell lower cost drugs, which actually is already working pretty dang well. They're now expanding that. That's a big thing. The other factor they're working on is making hospitals be transparent in pricing, which means that $50 lollipop, they're going to have to tell you ahead of time, and you can say, I will pass on the $50 lollipop. No, thank you. That, you know, when they charge you like, I don't know, what, $500 for an IV bag or whatever they charge, I don't know what they charge for it. They're going to have to tell you ahead of time. And if you can look at prices on the websites of the hospitals, you can shop and you can go to the one that offers like normal, sane prices. That's going to change that. The third factor is going after fraud and mass migration, whereby illegal aliens get free health care, either directly through certain states because they can't check migration status, because of, thanks Obama, because of Obamacare, and also because of them just scamming the emergency room system where they can't refuse care. Change that. That's going to lower costs. That's already happening. The fourth factor is going to go after fraud, actual fraud. And people defrauding Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, all of this, there's a lot of healthcare fraud. That will also have the effect of reducing it. So Americans, we've been paying insane amounts of money for a poor product because we're being robbed. That is the reality of it. That is the reality. And back to what I said about the nature of socialism. The argument is two sides right now. Yes, the American healthcare system is broken, in my opinion. It costs too much, quality of service is not good, and we're being gouged left and right. Like if I have to go to the hospital, I'm not going unless I really have to go, okay? That's my standard on it, just for myself. The solution on one side is fix the problems causing the problems. Get rid of the robbery. Get rid of the scams. Get rid of the bad trade deals. Change the policies that are causing the problems. The other argument is subsidize it, right? Single-payer healthcare, meaning you fix nothing. You don't fix any of the problems. You keep every single problem I just mentioned, but you force the taxpayer to pay for it. In other words, rather than fix it, you subsidize a failing system. And I've said it before that socialism is subsidized failure. You are subsidizing something that does not work to prevent something that would fail naturally, preventing it from failing. That's what it is. Subsidized failure or fixing a corrupt system. Which one do you want? Freedom or socialism? That's the question, right? That being said, speaking of state interventionism, and something actually very interesting. Have you ever heard that farmers cannot plant the seeds from the plants they grow? This actually has to do with GMOs and genetically modified seeds and a very interesting picture. I have a new episode of the Josh Philipp Show coming out today that explains how the entire things work. And I'm kind of in the middle on this, frankly. Because farmers can plant heirloom seeds, they choose not to. They instead plant modified seeds, whereby the seeds themselves are regulated through protective laws. And there are certain things with this that creates kind of a very interesting argument and a very interesting story about patent laws, about the way things used to be, which a lot of people have no idea how farming used to work. Do you know there was a government agency that used to collect seeds and distribute them for free to farmers, and actually worked as kind of collective among farmers to like create new strains of plants and all kinds of stuff that used to exist in America. What has replaced it is something very different, and it's very controlling, and a lot of farmers are having trouble basically affording it. I have a new episode coming out today that explains this entire thing, the history of it, how it happened, and the whole picture of it. I think it's a fascinating topic. I hope you do too. Let me show you the trailer. American farmers are facing a big problem. The seeds they use to grow all that food on our dinner plates, well, those seeds are expensive. And they're getting more expensive. And the problem has actually been getting so bad that members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are raising an alarm. They're warning the companies behind seeds and fertilizer are consolidating. Farmers are being left with fewer options on where to even go. Less competition, well, that means higher prices. That may sound counterintuitive. After all, look, don't seeds come from the crops that the farmers grow? But if a farmer were to take the seeds from their own crops and then plant those seeds, they could actually be committing a crime. This ties into a long history of legal battles, genetically altered foods, and the grand question of what we choose to buy or to not when we go to the supermarket. Now again, that episode comes out 4 p.m. Eastern Time today on the Josh Philipp Show, my new show on YouTube. Link in the chat, link in the description. I hope to see you there. And that said, thank you all so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.